family dinner, laughter, wine and conversation, until one woman stands up, raises her glass, and says 8 words that change everything. To my husband, who's been cheating for 15 years. But it doesn't stop there, because the woman he betrayed her with was sitting right at the table. What happened next left the entire family in shock, and trust me, you won't see this coming. Before we get into this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories like this, and drop a comment below. If you were in her shoes, what would you have done? Now, let's get into it. The dining room buzzed with laughter, forks clinking against plates, and glasses filled with wine. It was a long overdue family gathering, the kind where old stories resurfaced and relatives exchanged smiles over shared meals. At the head of the table, Lisa sat quietly, swirling the red wine in her glass, watching her husband, Mark, as he laughed at a joke his brother David had made. Across from them, David's wife, Karen, was cutting a piece of steak, her hands steady, her expression as unreadable as ever. Lisa had spent weeks preparing for this dinner. She had planned every detail, the menu, the seating, even the music playing softly in the background. But none of it was for celebration. It was for a reckoning. The weight of 15 years sat heavy on her chest, but tonight that weight would shift. She had lived in silence long enough. She stood up slowly, holding her glass high. The room quieted as everyone turned toward her. "I want to make a toast," she said, her voice steady. Mark smiled at her, expecting a few sweet words about their marriage or the family's bond. Lisa let the pause linger, her gaze moving from her husband to Karen, then back to Mark. "To my husband," she continued, raising her glass higher, "who has spent 15 years lying to me, and to Karen, my dear sister-in-law, who has spent 15 years sleeping with him." The air in the room changed instantly. Forks stopped mid-air. Breathing seemed to halt. Someone let out a soft gasp. Mark's face drained of color. Karen's hand trembled slightly as she placed her knife down, but she didn't look up. Lisa didn't sit back down. She didn't break eye contact with Mark. She let the words settle, let the silence stretch. "Go on, Mark," she said finally, tilting her head. "Tell everyone how you've been sharing a bed with David's wife for a decade and a half." Mark opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His usual smooth, confident voice failed him. His hands clenched into fists on the table. Karen, on the other hand, kept her eyes locked on her plate, refusing to look at anyone. David was the first to speak. His chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back, his face darkening with confusion. "What the hell is she talking about?" His voice was low, controlled, but barely. Lisa let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, you don't know? That's interesting, because your wife and mine have been quite close, and not in the way you'd expect." Karen finally looked up, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, and that was when Lisa knew. She wasn't going to deny it. The room wasn't buzzing with conversation anymore. It was thick with something else. The weight of secrets that had been dragged into the light. Lisa wasn't done, not yet. There was more to say, more to reveal, but for now she let the silence hang there, watching the cracks form in the family's perfect image. And then she took a sip of her wine. The room remained frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the slow ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching unbearably long. Lisa watched them all, her husband, her sister-in-law, her brother. 3 people whose lives had just been ripped open in front of everyone. Mark finally found his voice, but it wasn't smooth like usual. It was hoarse, shaky. "Lisa, let's not do this here." Lisa let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, now you want privacy? After 15 years of sneaking around, suddenly you care about where we talk? She turned to Karen, whose fingers were gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Say something, or are you going to sit there like a coward? Karen swallowed hard, but said nothing. That silence confirmed everything Lisa already knew. Karen wouldn't fight back. She wouldn't deny it. She wouldn't even try to defend herself, because there was nothing left to hide. David was staring at his wife now, his face unreadable. His jaw was clenched, his fists resting on the table, but he still hadn't looked at Mark. That was when Lisa knew. He was calculating, processing, and something about that unsettled her. Finally, David turned to Mark. His voice was calm, too calm. Is this true? Mark didn't answer. Lisa slammed her glass down on the table. Say it, Mark. You had no problem lying to my face for 15 years. Why stop now? Mark exhaled, rubbing his temples like this was just a mild inconvenience, as if the problem here was Lisa making a scene, not the fact that he had been betraying his wife and his own brother for over a decade. It's not what you think, he muttered. Lisa felt a flash of rage so sharp she could taste it. She leaned in, voice low and cold. Then why don't you tell me what I'm supposed to think, Mark? Tell me how this isn't exactly what it looks like. Karen finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa, please. Lisa snapped her head toward her. Please what, Karen? Please don't expose you. Please let you keep playing the devoted wife while you sleep with my husband behind your husband's back. Karen's eyes glistened, but Lisa had no sympathy left to give. David stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. His hands were shaking, but his voice was eerily quiet. How long? Lisa turned to him. 15 years. David blinked once. He exhaled sharply, then nodded, just once, before picking up his glass and hurling it against the wall. It shattered instantly, red wine splattering like blood against the wallpaper. Karen flinched. Mark's face hardened. Lisa didn't move. She had spent years waiting for this moment, years swallowing her suspicions, convincing herself she was just paranoid, just insecure. But now, with the truth out in the open, she felt something else. This wasn't just about a betrayal anymore. Something bigger was at play here, and Lisa was about to make sure everyone knew exactly what it was. The crash of the glass against the wall left a ringing silence in its wake. Lisa watched as David stood there, chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths, his face a mask of something unreadable. Anger, shock, or something else entirely. Mark wiped a hand over his face and finally looked at David. I didn't want you to find out like this. Lisa scoffed. Oh, and how exactly were you planning on telling him? On his birthday? Maybe a nice little confession at Christmas? Karen reached for David's arm, her voice weak. Please, let me explain. David pulled his arm away like her touch burned him. He didn't look at her. Instead, his eyes were locked on Mark. And then he did something that took everyone by surprise. He laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. 15 years, he repeated, shaking his head. That's a long time to lie to my face, Mark. Lisa frowned. Something about his tone was off. Too calm, too controlled. Karen swallowed hard, eyes darting between her husband and Mark. David, Shut up. He cut her off, voice like ice. Then he turned to Lisa. You think you're the only one who's been lied to? Lisa felt something shift in the air. What are you talking about? David leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. I knew. The words hit Lisa like a slap. She blinked. What? Karen's face went white. David let out a slow breath, his gaze never leaving Lisa's. I've known about them for years. The room was suddenly suffocating. Lisa felt her stomach twist. You knew? She repeated, voice barely above a whisper. David nodded. Not the whole 15 years, but long enough. Mark's mouth tightened. Karen's eyes filled with fresh panic. Lisa felt her hands tremble, but she curled them into fists. And you said nothing? David finally looked at Karen, his expression unreadable. What was I supposed to do, Lisa? Throw away my marriage? Destroy my family? I had two choices, leave her or pretend I didn't know, and I chose to keep my family intact. Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. So you let them keep going? You let them humiliate us? David's jaw tightened. I had my reasons. Karen let out a shaky breath. David, please. David ignored her. His focus was still on Lisa. You think you know everything, he said, voice dangerously low. Then let me tell you something, Lisa. Mark wasn't just cheating on you with my wife. He was lying about a lot more than that. Lisa's stomach dropped. What do you mean? David exhaled. Then he said something that made Lisa's blood run cold. You should ask him where all the money went. Lisa turned sharply to Mark. Mark's face went blank. And just like that, the betrayal she thought she had fully uncovered suddenly had another layer. Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears. She turned to Mark, eyes sharp. What money? Mark didn't answer. He just sat there, hands gripping the edge of the table, his face unreadable. David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Go on, Mark. Tell her. Or should I? Lisa's hands clenched. Tell me what? Mark finally looked at her, but there was no remorse in his expression, only frustration, like a man caught in a trap he thought he could escape. This is between me and David. David let out a bitter chuckle. Is it? Because last I checked, you stole from your wife just as much as you stole from me. Lisa felt her stomach twist. Stole? She turned to David. What the hell are you talking about? David's eyes flicked to Mark, who remained silent. He's been siphoning money for years, Lisa. And not just a little, hundreds of thousands. Gone. And guess where it went? Lisa barely breathed. Where? David tilted his head toward Karen. Ask her. Lisa's gaze snapped to her sister-in-law, who now looked visibly sick. Karen shook her head, her lips parting, but no words came out. Karen? Lisa's voice was dangerously calm. Karen finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. I didn't know. David scoffed. Oh, come on. Don't play dumb now. That house you wanted so badly, the expensive vacations, the gifts you told me your parents helped you buy, all of it came from him. He jabbed a finger at Mark, and he wasn't using his own damn money. Lisa felt something crack inside her. Mark? Her voice was sharp now. Is this true? Mark exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. It's complicated. Lisa slammed her fist against the table. Don't you dare. Karen looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I swear, Lisa, I didn't know where the money was coming from. David let out a humorless laugh. Right, because expensive jewelry and luxury hotels just fall from the sky. Lisa felt a cold rage creep into her chest. Mark, look me in the eye and tell me you didn't take our money. Mark finally met her gaze, but he said nothing. And in that silence, Lisa had her answer. David shook his head, pushing back his chair. I let a lot of things slide, Mark. I let you screw around with my wife. I let you make me a fool. But stealing from me, from Lisa, that's a different story. Mark clenched his jaw. I was going to pay it back. Lisa let out a hollow laugh. With what? Lies? David's voice darkened. Lisa, you don't even know the worst of it yet. Lisa turned to him sharply. What else? David exhaled, looking directly at Mark now. You tell her, or I will. Mark's face hardened. Lisa's breath hitched, and she knew. This was far from over. Lisa felt the weight of the room pressing down on her. Her husband had betrayed her. Her sister-in-law had stabbed her in the back. And now, there was still more. David's expression was unreadable, but Lisa could tell. Whatever was coming next was worse. Mark rubbed a hand over his face, then exhaled sharply. Lisa, I never wanted you to find out like this. Lisa stiffened. She recognized that tone. It was the same voice he had used every time he had lied to her before. Find out what? Mark hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Karen. Lisa caught it instantly. Oh, don't look at her. This isn't just about her, is it? Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. How many, Mark? Karen turned away, her face blank, but Lisa noticed something else. She wasn't shocked. Lisa felt something in her snap. She turned to David. How long have you known about this? David's jaw tightened. A while, but I only found out the full story recently. Lisa's stomach dropped. The full story. Mark sat back in his chair, shoulders tense, as if deciding whether to admit the truth or try to spin it. Lisa wasn't going to let him weasel out of this one. Say it, Mark. Her voice was cold. If there's something worse than sleeping with my sister-in-law and stealing from me, I want to hear it. Now. Mark's lips pressed together, his hands curled into fists. David leaned forward, voice like a knife. Lisa, it wasn't just Karen. Lisa's breath caught. He had another woman. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lisa felt a sharp ringing in her ears. The world around her blurred for a moment. Another? Her voice was barely above a whisper. David nodded. For years, while he was with Karen, he was also seeing someone else. And this time, Lisa, this one's going to hurt even more. Lisa swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay still. Who? David didn't blink. Someone you know. Lisa's chest tightened. Her mind raced, cycling through names, through faces. Who else could he have destroyed? Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew there was no way out now. Lisa's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Who, Mark? Mark exhaled. Then he said the name. And Lisa felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. That was all Lisa needed to know, that whoever he was about to name would destroy her. She felt the blood drain from her face, her fingers curling against the edge of the table. Say it. Mark exhaled sharply, avoiding her eyes. Then, finally, he muttered the name. Rachel. For a moment, Lisa's mind refused to process it. Rachel. Rachel. Number. The room around her faded into nothing. Rachel. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. My best friend, Rachel. Mark flinched but didn't answer. Lisa felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. She turned to David, desperate for denial. He's lying, right? Tell me he's lying. David didn't move. His silence was worse than confirmation. Karen had gone completely still. Her mouth was slightly open, eyes locked on Mark as if even she hadn't seen this coming. Lisa let out a shaky breath, hands pressed against the table to keep herself from collapsing. You slept with my best friend. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his face filled with frustration. It wasn't like that. Lisa let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh no, then tell me, Mark, how was it? Mark clenched his jaw. It was a mistake. Lisa slammed her palm against the table, the sound cracking through the tense air. A mistake? How long, Mark? His silence stretched too long. David answered for him. 3 years. Lisa felt like she had been punched in the chest. Her legs weakened, and she had to grip the back of her chair just to stay standing. 3 years. She was shaking now. Not 3 nights, not 3 months, 3 years. Mark's gaze was on the table, refusing to meet hers. Lisa felt her stomach twist. Rachel. The woman she had confided in, cried to, trusted. The woman who had comforted her when she suspected Mark was cheating. Lisa's voice came out hollow. She knew. She knew about Karen, and still... She cut herself off, the weight of it pressing down on her. She had been blind. Blind to the woman sleeping next to her, blind to the woman sitting across from her, blind to the woman she called a sister. Karen finally spoke, her voice small. I didn't know about Rachel. Lisa turned on her, her voice sharp. And that's supposed to make me feel better, that you were Mark's only secret for 15 years, but Rachel was just a little side hobby. Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. Lisa's breath came fast and uneven. Her hands trembled, and she clenched them into fists. You didn't just betray me, Mark. Her voice was low and dangerous now. You made a fool out of me, my best friend, my own family. Mark finally looked up, his eyes pleading. Lisa, Lisa shook her head, stepping back. She was done listening, but she wasn't done talking. Not yet. Lisa stood frozen, the weight of everything pressing against her chest. Her husband had betrayed her with Karen, her own sister-in-law. That alone was enough to shatter a marriage. But Rachel, her best friend, someone she had confided in, leaned on, trusted with her darkest fears. Her body felt numb, but her mind was on fire. 3 years. While Rachel had sat across from her at coffee shops, listening to her worries about Mark's late nights and secretive behavior, she had been sleeping with him. Lisa took a slow breath, her voice dangerously calm. So, let me get this straight. You weren't satisfied with just sleeping with your brother's wife, Mark? You had to go for my best friend, too. Mark pinched the bridge of his nose, as if this situation was exhausting. For him. Lisa, it wasn't like that. Lisa let out a hollow laugh. Oh, it wasn't? Then by all means explain to me. What was it like? Mark's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because there was no explanation. David pushed back his chair, his eyes dark and unreadable. Lisa, do you know how I found out? Lisa turned to him, her breath still unsteady. How? David exhaled through his nose. Rachel's husband told me. The words cut through the air like a blade. Lisa's heart stopped. Wait, what? David nodded. I wasn't the only clueless husband in this mess. Rachel's husband, Matt, he found out first. He followed her one night, saw her sneaking into a hotel. Guess who walked in right after her? Lisa's stomach twisted violently. David didn't wait for her to respond. Matt confronted Rachel. She confessed. She told him everything. That's when he called me. That's how I found out about Mark and Karen, too. Lisa couldn't breathe. Rachel's husband knew before her. He had sat on this information, knowing what Mark had done. She gripped the back of the chair for support. When did you find out, David? David's jaw tightened. A few months ago. Lisa snapped her head toward him, her body stiff. And you didn't tell me. David's expression remained unreadable. I was waiting for the right time. Lisa let out a bitter laugh. The right time? When exactly would that have been, David? At my funeral? Because that's about how long I would have had to wait at this rate. David didn't respond. Lisa turned back to Mark. her hands still trembling. "So, tell me, did you love her?" Mark's eyes flicked up to hers, but he didn't answer fast enough. Lisa's breath hitched. That hesitation was all she needed to know. Karen, who had been silent, suddenly spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Did you love her, Mark?" Lisa turned to her, her fury burning white-hot. "Oh, don't you start. What? Feeling jealous now? You were perfectly fine betraying me, but now that you find out you weren't his only mistake, you suddenly care?" Karen's face flushed red, but she had no comeback. Lisa's voice was sharp, filled with venom. "Let me guess. You thought you were special. Thought he only cheated because of some grand tragic love story with you?" Karen swallowed hard. Lisa scoffed. "Well, guess what, Karen? You were just one of many." She turned back to Mark, her fists clenching. "I hope Rachel was worth it, because after tonight, you won't have me, you won't have your family, and you sure as hell won't have a single cent left of my money." Mark's face darkened. "Lisa, don't do anything stupid." Lisa let out a slow breath, steadying herself. "Oh, don't worry, Mark. I'm about to do something very, very smart." And just like that, she picked up her wine glass, threw back the last sip, and walked away. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. Lisa walked out of the dining room, her steps steady, but her heart pounding. She needed air. She needed to think. She pushed through the glass patio doors and stepped outside, the cool night air hitting her like a slap. She gripped the railing, her mind racing. 15 years, her husband, her best friend, her sister-in-law. How much more was there? A voice came from behind her. "Lisa, wait." She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. David. He stepped beside her, exhaling heavily. "Are you okay?" Lisa let out a short, bitter laugh. "Do I look okay?" David was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice low. "There's something else you need to know." Lisa's stomach twisted. "Not again." She turned her head slightly, looking at him out of the corner of her eye. "What now?" David hesitated, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's about the money." Lisa's pulse quickened. "You said Mark stole from us. What else is there?" David took a deep breath. "He didn't just steal it, he hid it, and not just for himself." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" David exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. He was planning to leave. Lisa froze. "What?" David turned to her fully now, his voice even. "Mark wasn't just having affairs, he was preparing to disappear, to drain your accounts, take what he could, and walk away. From you, from the marriage, from everything." Lisa's entire body went cold. "You're lying." David shook his head. "I wish I was, but it's all there. The bank transfers, the offshore accounts. I found it when I started digging into the missing money. He wasn't just stealing, he was setting up a new life." Lisa's breath came in short, shallow bursts. "With Rachel?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. David hesitated just long enough. Lisa swallowed hard. Oh my God. Everything suddenly made sense. The secrecy, the hesitation, the stolen glances between Mark and Rachel. This wasn't just an affair. He was leaving me for her. David nodded. And he was going to take everything with him. Lisa felt something inside her snap. The betrayal had already crushed her, but this was another level. This wasn't just infidelity. This was calculated, planned. She turned back toward the house, her hands curling into fists. "Lisa," David said carefully, watching her, "what are you thinking?" Lisa exhaled slowly. I'm thinking it's time Mark realizes just how big of a mistake he made. David frowned. Lisa. But she wasn't listening. She turned on her heel, walking back inside with one purpose. If Mark thought he could destroy her and walk away untouched, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. Lisa stepped back into the dining room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The conversation had died, but the tension was thick, clinging to the air like smoke. Everyone was still there. Karen looked shaken. David was standing just behind her, and Mark was sitting with his elbows on the table, staring at his hands like a man waiting for a death sentence. Good. Lisa didn't sit down. She didn't need to. Instead, she stood at the head of the table, exactly where she had been when she made her first toast. Only this time, she wasn't here to expose the affair. She was here to end this, once and for all. She took a deep breath, her voice calm, controlled. So, Mark, since we're all sharing the truth tonight, let me tell you what I just learned. Mark finally looked up. Lisa met his eyes, tilting her head slightly. David, do you want to say it, or should I? David crossed his arms, his face unreadable. Go ahead. Lisa nodded and turned back to Mark. You weren't just screwing around. You were planning to leave me. A flicker of panic crossed Mark's face, but he quickly masked it. Lisa. She cut him off. Don't bother, I know everything. The secret accounts, the missing money, the escape plan. She narrowed her eyes. Were you going to tell me before or after you drained every last cent from my account? Karen gasped. Wait, what? Lisa ignored her. Mark's hands tightened into fists. It wasn't like that. Lisa laughed, a short, bitter sound. Oh, really? Then explain it to me. Explain why you've been moving money out of our joint account for years, why you've been setting up a life without me. Mark didn't answer. Lisa took a step closer. Let me guess. Rachel was going to be part of that life, wasn't she? Karen let out a soft, stunned noise. Even she hadn't seen this part coming. Lisa pressed on, her voice colder now. What was the plan, Mark? Run off with my best friend, start fresh, pretend I never existed. Mark exhaled sharply. Lisa, it wasn't like that. Lisa smirked. Then tell me exactly what it was like. Mark swallowed hard but didn't speak. That was when David stepped forward. It doesn't matter, Lisa, because he's not getting away with it. Lisa turned to him, eyebrows raised. Oh? David nodded, his jaw set. I made a few calls before I came here tonight. He looked at Mark. Your accounts are frozen. Every last cent you tried to hide? Gone. Mark shot up from his chair. You had no right. David cut him off, his voice sharp. You had no right. You stole from me. You stole from Lisa, and you thought you were going to walk away. He scoffed. Think again. Mark's face twisted in fury, but Lisa wasn't done yet. She took a slow step forward, her voice soft but deadly. You thought you could betray me and still win, that you could take everything I built, everything I trusted you with, and throw it away for your selfish little fantasy. She tilted her head. Well, Mark, I have news for you. She let the silence stretch, enjoying the flicker of fear in his eyes. You lost. Mark's mouth opened, but before he could speak, Lisa picked up her half-empty wine glass and threw it against the floor. The glass shattered, pieces flying in every direction. Karen flinched. Mark didn't move. Lisa took one last deep breath, then turned on her heel. Enjoy the mess you made, Mark. And with that she walked out, this time for good. Lisa stepped outside, the night air cool against her flushed skin. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear. From power, from clarity. For the first time in years, she was free. Behind her, she could still hear the chaos inside the house. David's voice, low and furious. Karen's muffled sobs. Mark trying and failing to regain control. It didn't matter. Lisa wasn't part of that world anymore. She was done. She walked toward her car, her mind racing, but this time it wasn't with doubt or heartbreak. It was with plans. She knew what people would say, that she should have seen the signs, that she had wasted years on a man who never deserved her. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was what came next. She wasn't just going to leave Mark. She was going to ruin him. She had already moved her own money out of their accounts. David had helped with that. She had called a lawyer before the reunion even started, and she had made sure that when Mark's betrayal came to light, he would be the one left with nothing. He thought he had outplayed her, but Lisa had been playing a game of her own. A car pulled up to the driveway, headlights flashing across her face. The door opened, and a familiar voice called out, "Lisa." She turned. Rachel's husband, Matt, stepped out, his face grim. "I heard what happened," he said. Lisa crossed her arms. "And?" Matt nodded slowly. "And I think it's time we finish what they started." Lisa tilted her head. "What are you suggesting?" Matt took a step closer, his eyes dark. "Revenge." Lisa considered him for a moment, then for the first time in a long time. She smiled. This wasn't over. Not yet. Lisa studied Matt's face, searching for hesitation, doubt, anything that might suggest he wasn't serious, but there was none. "Revenge?" she repeated, tilting her head slightly. Matt nodded. "They burned our lives down. I say we return the favor." Lisa took a slow breath, letting the idea settle. She had spent so many years swallowing her suspicions, ignoring the little voice in her head that told her something was wrong. She had given Mark the benefit of the doubt. She had trusted Rachel, and look where that had gotten her. She wasn't going to be that woman anymore. "What do you have in mind?" Matt's lips curled into a smirk. "You and I both know they care about one thing more than anything else: reputation." Lisa's mind clicked into place. He was right. Mark thrived on his image. The successful husband, the respected businessman, the charming family man. And Rachel, she was just as bad. She had spent years curating her perfect life, the one where she was a devoted wife, a trusted friend, a woman who would never do something like this. Lisa let out a slow exhale. "So we take that away from them." Matt nodded. Publicly. Lisa felt something dark and electric pulse through her. "Do you have proof?" Matt let out a short laugh. "Oh, I have everything. The messages, the bank statements, the hotel records. Rachel was careless. And Mark? He left a trail without even realizing it." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly did you get all of this?" Matt smirked. "Let's just say I had my suspicions long before I confronted Rachel. I didn't say anything right away because I wanted to be sure." "And now?" His eyes darkened. "Now I am." Lisa felt her pulse quicken. She had always thought revenge was beneath her, that it was something small, bitter people did when they couldn't move on. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. "So, what's the plan?" Matt's smirk widened. "We make sure everyone knows exactly who they really are. Their friends, their colleagues, their families. We let the world see what they tried to hide." Lisa inhaled deeply, her fingers curling into her palm. "Let's do it." And just like that, Mark and Rachel's world, the one they had built on lies, betrayal, and stolen money, was about to come crashing down. And this time, Lisa would be the one lighting the match.